Welcome to the Thinking Abyss podcast, a philosophical journey through consciousness, reality, and the phenomena that challenge our understanding of existence. From ancient wisdom to cutting-edge theories, we explore where philosophy meets science and curiosity leads to the edge of the unknown.
When you examine the historiography of human civilization, it is predominantly a catalog of external instrumentation. We chart the progression of our species through the materials we manipulate, classifying epochs as the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, or the Iron Age.
Or we classify them by the primary methods of energy capture and utilization, transitioning from steam to nuclear, and currently to information.
Precisely. However, this focus on the external completely obscures a critical control variable. Throughout the entire temporal span of behavioral modernity, which encompasses roughly 40,000 years since the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, the biological hardware of the human being has remained an absolute constant.
The cognitive architecture, the metabolic pathways, and the physiological parameters of the individual who painted the caves at Lascaux are, for all functional purposes, identical to those of the individual designing a quantum satellite or decoding a genome today.
Tools, urbanization, and collective knowledge have evolved exponentially, yet the organism itself has remained in a state of biological stasis.
This creates a profound systemic dissonance in our current historical moment. You must recognize that we are effectively operating advanced, globalized, high-velocity digital infrastructures using a brain adapted for small-scale hunter-gatherer survival in the Pleistocene environment.
There is a fundamental mismatch between the accelerating complexity of our external environment and the static nature of our internal processing capabilities. However, we are now observing a convergence of transformative technologies, specifically artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, neural interfaces, and nanotechnology.
And this convergence actively challenges that biological stasis. We are approaching a threshold where the human body and mind are no longer fixed constants, but rather modifiable variables.
This transition signals the emergence of the posthuman era. This is distinct from the Industrial Revolution, which altered the environment around the human. This is a transformation of the subject of history itself.
We must analyze this not as speculative fiction, but as an unfolding sociobiological reality. To grapple with this transformation, you first have to rigorously define the terminology.
Because posthuman is a concept that has been deployed with varying implications across distinct academic disciplines. In the broadest analytical sense, posthumanism refers to a blurring or dissolution of the boundaries that have traditionally defined the human in opposition to the machine, the animal, or the environment.
It functions primarily as a descriptive marker, indicating the epoch that follows the historical dominance of the human. And in certain intellectual circles, it functions as a normative goal.
It posits that the human is not a static endpoint of evolution, nor a perfected biological form, but rather a transitional phase. Central to this conceptualization is the theoretical work of N. Catherine Hales.
Particularly her analysis of the cybernetic posthuman. Her work shifts the locus of identity from the physical body to the informational pattern.
In the liberal humanist tradition, which underpins much of Western legal and ethical thought, you will find the self viewed as an embodied essence, a distinct biological entity bounded by skin.
Hales argues that in the posthuman view, identity is constituted by a pattern of information. The implication here is radical. If the self is defined by the pattern of information processing consciousness, memory, personality structure, then the biological substrate becomes secondary.
The neurons in flesh become merely the current vessel for the pattern, theoretically interchangeable with a silicon or synthetic substrate.
This informational ontology of the self provides the grounding for transhumanism. Transhumanism represents the proactive, programmatic branch of this shift.
We must distinguish this clearly from critical posthumanism. Transhumanism, as articulated by figures such as Nick Bostrom, Ray Kurzweil, and Max Moore, presents a philosophy where the posthuman is a desirable objective to be actively pursued through engineering.
The transhumanist agenda focuses on specific technical goals: radical life extension, the augmentation of cognitive capacity, and ultimately substrate independence or mind uploading.
They view the biological limitations of the human species disease, senescence, limited working memory, mortality, as technical problems to be solved, rather than inevitable features of existence.
Conversely, critical posthumanism, which is rooted in the humanities and critical theory, focuses on deconstruction rather than enhancement.
Critical posthumanists analyze how the category of the human has historically been constructed by exclusion. They argue that the definition of human was often established in opposition to animals, machines, and marginalized groups of humans who were treated as lesser.
For these thinkers, the post-human era is an opportunity not to create supermen in a Nietzschean or technological sense, but to dismantle the anthropocentric assumptions of humanism entirely.
It is a critique of the hierarchy that places the human at the center of the ethical universe. However, despite these divergent philosophical aims, both schools of thought converge on the material reality of the current technological shift.
We are witnessing a move from incremental change to transformative change. The technologies in question act directly on the human organism.
We must examine these specific technologies, beginning with the rewriting of biology itself through genetic engineering. The primary driver here is the development of CRISPR-Cas9 and subsequent gene editing tools,
which have transitioned genetics from a field of observation to a field of manipulation. We have moved from a theoretical understanding of genetics to a read-write capability.
We can now edit the human genome with a precision and speed that was scientifically implausible prior to 2012. Currently, you can observe a bifurcation in application between therapeutic editing and enhancement.
Therapeutic somatic editing targets specific tissues in a living patient to cure disease. This addresses conditions like sickle cell anemia, blindness, or specific cancers.
This is medically significant but philosophically consistent with the traditional medical model. It restores the pathological system to a normal baseline.
The threshold is irrevocably crossed with germline editing. This involves the modification of embryos, sperm, or eggs.
The critical distinction is that these edits are heritable. They are passed down to all subsequent generations, thereby permanently altering the human gene pool.
The case of He Jiankui in 2018 serves as the defining historical inflection point here. By editing the genomes of twin girls to confer resistance to HIV by disabling the CCR5 gene, he demonstrated that the technical capability for post-human design already exists.
The global scientific condemnation he faced was primarily regarding oversight, safety, and the risk of off-target mutations, rather than the fundamental feasibility of the technology itself.
That case highlighted the inevitability of the technology's proliferation. While currently restricted by international consensus, the potential for a genetic aristocracy is a tangible sociological risk.
If the technology allows for the enhancement of polygenic traits, such as intelligence, physical resilience, or longevity, and if it remains a market-driven commodity, you face the prospect of biological stratification.
Wealth would no longer merely purchase superior education or nutrition. It would purchase a superior biological substrate.
This aligns with the transhumanist vision of improvement, but introduces severe complications regarding equality and power dynamics. We could theoretically witness a speciation event driven by economic disparity.
Moving from the biological substrate to the cognitive, we encounter neural interfaces. The expansion of the mind through brain-computer interfaces constitutes the second pillar of this transition.
Current applications by entities like Neuralink, Synchron, and BlackRock Neurotech are largely restorative. They bridge gaps in the nervous system to restore movement or communication for paralyzed patients.
However, the explicit long-term vision articulated by proponents is the establishment of a high-bandwidth connection between biological cognition and digital systems.
The concept of bandwidth is crucial to understanding the motivation behind BCI. Currently, your interface with digital intelligence is limited by the speed at which you can type or speak.
This input-output mechanism is a drastic bottleneck compared to the speed of synaptic transmission and digital processing. A direct neural interface aims to remove this bottleneck,
effectively turning the brain into a node within a larger computational network. The consequences for individual identity are highly destabilizing.
If memory can be outsourced to a cloud architecture, or if knowledge can be accessed directly without the traditional cognitive process of learning, the boundary of the self becomes porous.
Furthermore, this permits the theoretical possibility of non-linguistic communication, the direct sharing of mental states or sensory data between individuals, bypassing the mediation of language entirely.
We must also acknowledge that low-tech precursors to this integration are already prevalent. The widespread off-label use of pharmacological enhancements, modafinil, and amphetamines in academic and professional environments represents a rudimentary form of chemical posthumanism.
It demonstrates a societal willingness to alter neurochemistry for performance. However, the integration of artificial intelligence represents what we might term external posthumanism.
Even without direct biological connection, AI functions as an extension of the self.
Indeed, we are observing the emergence of a symbiotic relationship. Large language models and multimodal systems are shifting from passive tools to active collaborators.
They shape decision-making, curate information intake, and increasingly generate cultural output. The risk here, often cited as the alignment problem, frames the existential boundary of the posthuman era.
If we develop artificial general intelligence that surpasses human cognition across all domains, the human species moves from being the primary agent of history to a secondary position.
The alignment of such a system with human values is not guaranteed, posing an existential risk that is distinct from the biological risks of genetic engineering.
It redefines intelligence as a phenomenon that does not necessarily require a biological host.
The fourth technological pillar is longevity science. This field is fundamentally reframing aging from an inevitability to a treatable condition.
This represents a paradigm shift from a medical model of care to an engineering model of maintenance. Researchers like Aubrey de Grey argue that aging is simply the accumulation of damage at the molecular and cellular level.
Processes such as telomere shortening, mitochondrial dysfunction, and cellular senescence. If these are characterized as engineering problems, they theoretically have engineering solutions.
The pursuit of radical life extension by corporations like Calico and Unity Biotechnology suggests a future where the human lifespan could be extended by decades, or perhaps indefinitely.
This disrupts the fundamental structure of the human condition. Mortality is the organizing principle of our psychology, our social institutions, and our intergenerational contracts.
A society where individuals live to 150 or 200 years of age would require a total restructuring of retirement, career progression, and inheritance.
It also raises the psychological question of meaning. Without the urgency imposed by a finite timeline, the architecture of human ambition and relationships would fundamentally alter.
These technological shifts precipitate profound philosophical and ethical challenges, primarily concerning identity and continuity.
The most extreme scenario, mind uploading, forces us to confront the paradox of teleportation. If we transfer a consciousness to a digital substrate, we must determine whether it is a transfer of the self or a destructive replication.
Does the original consciousness cease to exist, replaced by a perfect copy that merely perceives itself as the original?
Derek Parfit's philosophical work on identity provides a critical framework for this dilemma. Parfit argues that identity in the strict sense, being the exact same entity across time, is less important than psychological continuity.
If there is an overlapping chain of memory, intention, and personality, what he terms relation R, the self, survives, regardless of the substrate.
This view supports the transhumanist project. It posits that the pattern is significant, not the vessel. However, this contrasts sharply with the view articulated by bioethicists like Leon Kass.
Kass argues for the wisdom of repugnance. The idea that our instinctive revulsion toward radical enhancement, cloning, or disembodiment is not mere superstition, but a deep moral intuition about the dignity of the natural human form.
For Kass, the biological limits are intrinsic to human meaning.
This leads directly to the question of justice and the enhancement divide. The ethical concern here is the potential for speciation driven by economics.
If posthuman technologies are distributed via market mechanisms, we risk an unprecedented split between the enhanced and the unenhanced.
This constitutes a threat to the foundations of democratic governance. Democracy is predicated on a rough equivalence of capacity and vulnerability among citizens.
We are all intelligent enough to understand the laws, and we are all equally subject to death. That is our shared baseline.
If a subset of the population possesses vastly superior cognitive processing and extended lifespans, that shared basis for solidarity evaporates.
The enhanced would literally embody a different class of being, making the current disparities in wealth or education seem negligible by comparison.
Legislative frameworks struggle to accommodate a population where one group possesses cognitive capabilities orders of magnitude higher than the other.
Furthermore, there is the issue of consent regarding future generations. Germline engineering is an imposition of a permanent trait upon a descendant who cannot consent.
This creates an intergenerational ethical bind. The philosopher Jürgen Habermas addresses this through the concept of liberal eugenics. He argues that genetic programming violates a child's right to an open future.
Habermas makes a crucial distinction between the grown and the made. When a human is born naturally, their genetic constitution is a result of chance, a genetic lottery.
This randomness allows the individual to view themselves as the sole author of their life because no external agent intended them to be that specific way.
If an individual is genetically designed by parents or the state, they become made objects, technical artifacts of another's will.
This potentially collapses the symmetry between generations, placing the designer in a position of permanent dominance over the designed.
It introduces a form of biological predestination that is antithetical to the concept of autonomy. The subject becomes a project.
We must also consider the cultural and social dimensions through which these changes are mediated. Fiction and art are not merely entertainment in this context, they are the simulation engines of the public imagination.
Narrative frameworks shape how we perceive these technologies before they even arrive.
The cultural imagination has been processing the post-human long before the technology materialized. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein warned of the abandonment of the created by the creator, the Frankenstein complex that generates fear of our own inventions.
Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep question the exclusivity of empathy and consciousness. Cyberpunk literature, specifically William Gibson's work, prefigured the merger of mind and network.
These narratives provide the emotional texture used to evaluate progress. However, reception is culturally variable.
In secular Western contexts, enhancement might be viewed through the lens of individual liberty. In other cultural or religious frameworks, it may be viewed as hubris, a violation of the sacred order.
Or conversely, in some Eastern frameworks, as a continuum of self-cultivation.
This cultural variation brings us to the question of governance and control, specifically the question of who speaks for the future.
The development of post-human technologies is geographically and ideologically concentrated. It is largely occurring within Silicon Valley and specific corporate entities.
This concentration results in value encoding. The specific values of the tech sector, demographic libertarian individualism, market-driven accelerationism, and a utilitarian approach to problem solving are being hard-coded into the technologies themselves.
There is a significant democratic deficit. The broader human population is effectively excluded from the decision-making process regarding whether or not we should pursue a post-human trajectory.
We are being presented with the technologies as inevitable market products rather than as subjects of political deliberation.
The populace is not voting on the integration of neural laces. They are merely awaiting the commercial release.
We must conclude with an assessment of the current threshold. Are we in the post-human era or simply anticipating it?
It is crucial to maintain a reality check. The rising river analogy is highly appropriate here. We are standing at the edge. The water is not yet at our feet, but the rise is measurable.
We are in a transitional period. The destination is not guaranteed. Gene editing remains fraught with off-target risks and high costs.
Brain-computer interfaces currently have low bandwidth and require invasive surgery. Artificial intelligence is sophisticated, but not sentient. Longevity studies in mice do not perfectly translate to humans.
However, the trajectory is cumulative. The post-human era will not arrive on a specific date, like a treaty signing.
It will arrive through the accumulation of incremental modifications. A neural implant here, a gene therapy there, an AI assistant seamlessly integrated into daily cognition.
Eventually, the cumulative weight of these changes fundamentally alters the organism. We are the frog in the boiling water, but the water is technology.
The intimacy of this transformation distinguishes it from all prior technological revolutions. Steam engines and electricity changed how we lived. Post-human technologies change who is living.
They alter the subject of history, the entity that thinks, feels, and acts.
And that outcome is not scientifically predetermined. It is fundamentally a question of values.
It requires the engagement of philosophy, politics, and the arts, not just engineering.
When you synthesize all these vectors, the ultimate challenge becomes clear. We may not be able to choose if the post-human era arrives. The technological momentum may already be too great, but we must choose what kind of post-human era it will be. Will it be one of extreme stratification and loss of autonomy, or one of equitable expansion of the human condition?
The conversation regarding these values is the defining task of the 21st century.
It is, without overstatement, the task of deciding the future of the species. Consider how the integration of external cognition might already be subtly shifting your own parameters of identity and what that means for the generation that follows.